interesting experience in that, too, because we're, of course, at distance and each party reduces their numbers in the House. I've been with my colleague from Fredericton and a colleague from Nanaimo Ladysmith. We've been coming in by turns. So in our last round of voting, I was voting by Zoom. And I think probably some of us in the House were as well. There was an eerie moment, Madam Speaker, where as we were voting, one could hear Donald Trump's voice. Someone was, in one of the channels, paying attention to the U.S. presidential debate. I only mention that because I'm so extremely grateful to be Canadian. I'm very grateful to be with all of you tonight and those who are still on Zoom. I'm very grateful that even in what for Canadians could sometimes veer towards the toxic partisan debate, we hear each other. We, for the most part, speak respectfully to each other. We don't have a leader who yells and refuses to condemn white supremacy. It's distressing, to put it mildly. So in the context of speaking to this, I want to commend those things about all of us that make us Canadian. I am grateful that this Parliament is a minority parliament. I don't much like false majorities where a minority of the voters can deliver 100% of the power to the party that has the most seats. I'm grateful for the fact that this Parliament, facing the COVID pandemic, has, as the member for Barrie Innisfil was mentioning earlier tonight, how closely we were all working with the Minister of Global Affairs and with the Parliamentary Secretary and many others to get our constituents home. We have, for the most part, through this pandemic, found ways to work together. I am grateful that the New Democratic Party worked with the Liberals to vastly improve the piece of legislation we have in front of us. We can't say it solves all the problems, and I will speak to that for the bulk of my remarks. But earlier tonight, one of our colleagues said that Canada was failing. And I just want to address that directly and say that we are struggling. Every single part of the human family, no matter where you find those governments, those societies, however they're knit together in successful, healthy democracies that are prosperous like ours, or in countries that were on the verge of collapse before COVID hit, every country is struggling to one degree or another. But I also thank God I'm not in Brazil, where Bolsonaro just got rid of all the restrictions on logging in the mangrove forests, while the Amazon is so dry that the Pantanal wetlands, extraordinary wetlands of biodiversity that is a part of the patrimoine de notre planète. Et maintenant, c'est en feu. Le fumier.
And now, the fires are ablaze in the forests. And even in British Columbia, we have recently been breathing in smoke from wildfires in Oregon and Washington. Simultaneously, we are facing the consequences of climate change and of the pandemic.
What country I could belong to, we are not failing. We are struggling, we're working together, and as long as we keep the spirit of working together, we'll get through this okay. We'll be through this and really will be capable of building back better. We will be capable of reimagining our future. We will deliver, and somehow not trusting each other all that much because we belong to different political parties, but when we get past the thing about our parties, we trust each other. If I was in trouble, I could call any one of you, and I know that there would be help coming. So we are one family, all of us Canadians. And in that context, I welcome this legislation. It does, I hope, alleviate the concerns for most Canadians, but it clearly doesn't speak to all of us. There's much more work to do. And we know that we have not, particularly one group of Canadians who've been let down badly through all this, is Canadians with disabilities. We have a lot more work to do there. And for businesses, and my friend from Courtney Alberni was mentioning this earlier, so many businesses are in deep trouble. I'm very concerned for the tourism sector. One of the iconic tourism businesses in my riding, and I'm going to say Butchart Gardens, because I know my colleagues are from Vancouver Island. Well, across Canada, people know Butchart Gardens. I've been talking to the general manager and the CEO. They're very worried they won't make it till next year. Their business has dropped by 90%. They had to lay off 450 people. Help isn't coming. So tourism businesses particularly need an infusion of relief help and cash, and somehow we have to do that. Individual small businesses, restaurateurs, touring companies, all kinds of companies, small businesses and large, are still in trouble. And we don't know when the pandemic will end. I remember when it started, more or less, standing here, March 13th, and thinking, do we really have to not come back till April 20th? That seems a rather long time. Do you remember how that felt, my colleagues here? We had no idea. We still don't know. So it's very important for Canada to hold together, that we actually hold together. I'll reference something before I turn back to the bill. One of Canada's more brilliant academics, Thomas Homer Dixon, has a new book out called Commanding Hope, which is about how it really matters to use hope as a tool to hang on to pulling people through in tough times. It couldn't have come out at a better time as during these dual threats of climate crisis and pandemic. But he mentioned to me that in polling around the world, certain countries, and most countries, now this is encouraging, most countries are now experiencing more social cohesion than before the pandemic started. Not the case in the United States, not the case in Brazil, but most nations are feeling that sense that my father used to tell me about when he grew up in London during the Blitz, and that sense of we're all in this together. And as my father used to say, he said at one point when we'd been busy fighting the government of Nova Scotia on one environmental fight or another, and he said, you know, I really preferred the Second World War. And I said to him, how could you possibly have preferred the Second World War? You risk of being blown up at any moment. He said, well, you know, back then, he said, you know, we really had the feeling the government was on our side. That's what people are feeling now for the first time. I think in a long time, generationally, we've been distanced from this notion that if you're in real trouble, you're really not going to turn to the billionaire class to bail you out, because they're busy making more money all on their own. They're not figuring out how to hold bake sales for the rest of us. Well, back to this bill. I'm extremely glad to see the changes that have been made to make sure that it's $500 a week and not $400 a week. I'm extremely glad to know that we're trying to figure out how we can have a Canada Recovery benefit, a Canada Recovery sickness benefit, a Canada Recovery caregivers benefit. But as you read the details of this, what comes to me all the time is how hard it is to legislate by specific example and hope not to forget anyone. You start thinking, well, okay, so just to read you samples, and of course, all of my colleagues here have read this, but for people watching, if anyone is insomniac and watching this right now, the child could not attend, so you're going to be able to qualify for this benefit if you have a child who is normally cared for under the age of 12 years of age on the first day of the week because the school the child normally attended for reasons related to COVID has had to close or maybe be open only certain times a day, or the child couldn't attend school because the child had contracted or might have contracted COVID, or the child was in isolation because a doctor said they might be better off in isolation, or that they might be at risk of health complications, or the person who usually cared for the child was not available because of COVID, or they cared for a family member who required supervised care because the day program or facility that family member normally attended was, well, I could keep going on and on and on, because in anticipating every specific, in order to have the benefit work for everyone, listing specifics inevitably leaves something out. So I would suggest, again, and not for the first time in this place, that we really need to think about the universality of our social safety net. Our healthcare system works because it was made universal. If Tommy Douglas had sat down in Saskatchewan way back when and said, let's create a healthcare system where we can list the people who might need help, it wouldn't have worked. So, okay, if you happen to be really, really sick, and let's say this is only X amount of money you've got in your bank account, or let's say you're a bit sick, but if you can't, look, it would never, universality is necessary for a social safety net. It's really time to talk about and to implement a guaranteed livable income. I think, and now we know the Parliamentary Budget Officer did an initial review and said, well, a universal income would be cheaper than CERB, but a truly universal income would be enormous and would end up saving our society money in our healthcare system, because poverty is the single largest social determinant of health, because it would save us money in corrections, because it's a lot cheaper to make sure people are going to school, getting a good start in life, and go to university. It's a lot cheaper than keeping them in jail, which is over $100,000 a year per prisoner. You start looking at, as Hugh Segal, former progressive conservative senator, has done in his book, Bootstraps Need Boots. There are multiple and good and solid reasons to move to guaranteed livable income. I put this to the minister earlier today, to the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion, and I was really pleased with her answer, in that, paraphrasing her answer, she said, this is what we're doing now. We're getting this benefit out to replace CERB, and it's going to be CERB into EI, and then there's the relief programs and the sickness, and I completely agree with the New Democrats. Being able to take leave if you're sick is something that every Canadian should be able to count on. But all that to the side, what I wanted to say that the minister shared was, just because we're doing this now doesn't mean that there are other conversations to be had. Let's hang on to that and really work with Finance Canada and the Parliamentary Budget Office and with the provincial and municipal order of governments and figure out how much money could be saved when we stop having shame-based poverty Band-Aid programs, like welfare programs where if a single mother goes back to work, any money she makes is clawed back from welfare, or the programs that if a single mother moves in with her boyfriend, she loses all the benefits. I mean, this kind of programming for poverty doesn't eliminate poverty, it perpetuates poverty. So it's in the interest of Canada as a whole. It's in the interest of the health of our society, our resilience, our ability to manage the next pandemic, or we really can't manage what happens with the climate crisis if we don't act fast. And frankly, the speech from the throne is quite inadequate in that regard, but tonight's debate isn't on the speech from the throne, so I'll stick to our Canada recovery benefits and the other sections of this bill. This gives us a sense of what must be done, but we're still falling short. So I take heart from the minister's response many hours ago, I think about 13 hours ago, perhaps. I take heart from the minister's response earlier today that there's a conversation to be had about guaranteed livable income in this country. How much progress is that? In the 2019 election, which was only a year ago, nobody but Greens was talking about guaranteed livable income. Some NDPers were, but not in the platform. So here we are. We need to actually grab this moment and think, how large are the transformational moments that are possible now? Because this is not just a pandemic affecting Canada. This is global. Every single modern democracy, every G20 country is dealing with debt and deficit. We have to think big. We have to reimagine our rules. I was pleased that the Prime Minister said to the United Nations, let's think about something as big as a new version of the Bretton Woods Conference. Let's really look at what can be done, because we are at a hinge moment in history. This bill helps. It won't be enough, but let's pass it quickly. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and honorable député.
The honorable member. Madam Speaker, I have tremendous respect for the member who just spoke. I've been following him since the beginning, and I have to say I think he's fantastic. That's in complete confidentiality. My mother has always said, don't ever compare yourself to the worst, because of course you'll be the best. We've heard Trump and others, when we compare ourselves to them, of course we're better. But why are we here tonight? Because there has been closure for 6 weeks. Parliament was prorogued. I don't think that is being the best. And I'd like to know whether the member, for whom I have tremendous respect, I'd like to know if she thinks, why she thinks the government prorogued. Was it truly to deliver a speech from the throne and redirect its vision for the pandemic, or was it to hide scandals such as the We Charity scandal? Thank you to my colleague. I'm delighted to hear that he adores me. I don't think I'll be able to talk about anything else now.
Moi, avec l'heure très tard, I think I'm almost too tired to speak in English, much less try to find my second language. I don't think there's any doubt that we wouldn't have had prorogation if Bill Morneau and the government and the Prime Minister hadn't bumped into the We Charity scandal. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I am much more charitable than most in that I recognize the immense difference between the 2008 prorogation, which was epically unconstitutional, and that it was an effort by a Prime Minister to avoid a vote he knew he would lose, in which he might not be able to form government because there was a coalition in the wings. That's a very different situation, one that, by the way, in all of the Commonwealth of Nations, of the Commonwealth nations, I should say, those that use Westminster parliamentary democracy, our very interesting archaic system, only one other country had ever had a prime minister request go to a governor general for prorogation to avoid a vote they knew they would lose. The previous example was also Canadian, Sir John A. Macdonald. The only other country where this had ever happened was Sri Lanka, where the governor general turned them down. So there's prorogations that are toxic and unconstitutional, and there are prorogations that are convenient and politically unworthy. This was of the latter variety.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague and neighbour. I can see the beautiful Mount Maxwell on Salt Spring Island from my house, and that's part of the riding of Saanich Gulf Islands. But I want to thank her for expanding the conversation that we're having tonight on Bill C-4 to talk about how this really is a first step, and that I think many Canadians are seeing this as a moment in time where we have the ability to reimagine what Canada's full potential can be. And we've heard a lot of discussion today. Part of the discussion is centered on the cost, and I will agree that it has been a significant cost. But I'm really glad that in the course of her debate, she also started touching on the costs of institutionalized poverty, and how that continues to be such a drag on so many of our communities right across this great country. I look in the Cowichan Valley at how the opioids crisis is ravaging the downtown core of Duncan right now. That is traced back to institutionalized poverty. That is individuals who have suffered multiple forms of trauma, whether it's mental health, physical abuse, the ongoing trauma of everyday lived experiences in poverty. Those have real costs to our society, Madam Speaker. They have costs, as she mentioned, in incarceration rates, in our health services. And so, I just want to ask her to again comment on that, on how these investments in things like a guaranteed livable income are actually in the long run going to make our country a better place, not only socially and in a health manner, but also economically, and put us on the path for the better. Thank you.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you. I thank my dear colleague from Cowichan, Malahat, Langford. Yes, of course, I know you couldn't see Mount Maxwell lately because we were in so much smoke. It's been a very depressing time between knowing you can only visit your friends outdoors and at distance, and then you can't because you have to go indoors because of smoke, and they can't come in with you because they're not in your bubble. It's a distressing time. The institutionalized poverty and accepting it as normal isn't something Canada should ever do. Other countries, I don't know how many people experience this in Europe, and you start thinking as you're walking along, I haven't seen anybody homeless on the street with a hat upside down and hoping that they can panhandle their way to their next meal. That's not something you see. Or my friend from Burnaby, New Westminster, we talk about Jim. I haven't seen Jim lately, but I haven't been walking on the street. A friend who's a veteran who needs to panhandle for his medication just outside of the Chateau Laurier. There's no excuse for a country like Canada to tolerate poverty. And as Martin Luther King said many, many years ago, there's only one solution, he said, I've ever found to eliminate poverty, and it's a guaranteed income.
Comments, questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to begin by acknowledging that the signature eloquence and passion of the member for Saanich Gulf Islands is not diminished one bit, even at 1:50 in the morning. And so I very much appreciate the comments that the member had shared at the beginning of her, especially at the beginning of her speech, when she emphasized the collaboration and the real true Team Canada approach that is really the signature of this piece of legislation and how it came about. And it's a common theme that I noticed that was also in the comments that were made by my colleague from the MP from Edmonton, Strathcona, as well as the MP from Vancouver East as well, acknowledging the fact that this bill really is the product of the government and the opposition working together, listening to each other. And really that is, I think, the particular strength of Bill C-4 is the fact that it is undergirded and supported by the fact that this was a tremendous listening exercise. We listened not just to each other, not just to members across the aisle, but we also listened to our constituents. We listened to workers. We listened to Canadians. We listened to families. We listened to unions. We listened to businesses. And that really is the particular strength, that collaboration, that listening, working together. That is the particular strength of Bill C-4. And as the member had pointed out as well too, legislation moving forward is going to evolve. This legislation that's being brought forward is not going to preclude other changes. And in fact, the evolution has always been the signature of our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that we adapt to it. And so I wanted to ask the member to maybe comment on that sense of collaboration and teamwork that really undergirded the design and development of Bill C-4. Thank you.
For Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, thank you, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. In this pandemic, I often tell my constituents, because we've been holding, I'm sure other colleagues have, the community meetings that we used to have in the local community hall have been replaced by the latest thing that has come to both aid us and torment us, Zoom. But I meet with my constituents frequently, and their concerns are the same ones that I think all of us here. Concerns for how they're going to make ends meet, concerns for keeping a business open. But they're very, very encouraged when I tell them we're all working together. Civil servants are working awfully hard. Everyone knows that by hanging together, we will help each other. Partisanship is our enemy in this, and that's why I'm very nervous as first New Brunswick, now British Columbia, Saskatchewan, the more elections we have, I feel as though the less safe we are. And it's not that democracy as experienced in an election isn't a healthy thing. I just worry about us trying to score points off each other more than band together to help our constituents. This legislation shows that spirit of collaboration in the interests of Canada.
End of debate. Pursuant to the order made earlier today, it is my duty to interrupt the proceedings and put forthwith every question necessary to dispose of the second reading stage of the bill now before the House. La Chambre est-elle prête à se prononcer?
Is the House ready to decide? This is the question. Madame Qualtrough.